Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a sky pirate ruler of the steampunk skies. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sky was a canvas of bruised violet and fading gold, a vast, open sea of atmosphere where the only islands were those fortunate enough to be chained to the heavens. Below, the miasma, a toxic, churning blanket of poison, forever erased the memory of the ground. For the people of the skies, reality was the deck of an airship, the hum of an Ethereum crystal, and the constant, whispering promise of the wind. Aboard the bridge of the airship All Might, that whisper was a roar. Captain Izuku Deku Midoriya stood not at the helm, but hunched over a brass and hardwood tactical table, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was not the image of a fearsome sky pirate. His frame was lean, his green hair an untamable mop, and his face, dusted with freckles, held an earnestness that seemed at odds with his profession. His authority came not from a booming voice or a menacing stature, but from the silent, frantic energy that radiated from him, the energy of a mind working at a pace that left others breathless. His signature analytical goggles were pushed up onto his forehead, their myriad of lenses glinting in the soft glow of the binnacle. His fingers, stained with a faint patina of engine grease and ink, danced across a navigational chart, tracing vectors and calculating wind shear. "She's running heavy, Captain." A voice, warm and bright as a sun-drenched morning, cut through his muttering. Izuku looked up. Ochako Uraraka, his first mate, leaned against the railing, her own custom-made flight goggles hanging loosely around her neck. Her call sign, 0G, was etched onto the leather strap. She was the heart of his crew, her unshakable optimism the ballast that kept them all level in the fiercest storms. "Heavy and slow," Izuku agreed, tapping the chart. "The Sovereignty freighter Gilded Cage. According to our source, she's carrying a full load of refined Ethereum shards, Class 7 medical supplies, and, get this, a luxury shipment of hydroponic fruits from the core islands. All bound for Commodore All for One's private estate on Kamino." A sharp, indignant huff came from the engineering console. "Hydroponic fruit! While the outer islands are boiling shoe leather for broth. The audacity is mechanically unsound." Chief Engineer Tenya Ida stood ramrod straight, his crisp uniform immaculate despite the ambient heat radiating from the engine room below. His movements were precise, economical, aided by the polished steel augmentations encasing his legs. These steam-powered pistons, his own invention, allowed him to traverse the cavernous engine room of the All Might in mere seconds. "That's why we're here, Ida," Ochako said, her smile turning sharp. "To perform a little cargo redistribution." Izuku's gaze drifted past them, through the reinforced glass of the bridge, to their target. The Gilded Cage was a beast of a ship, a floating fortress designed to showcase the Sovereignty's might. Its hull was plated in ostentatious gold-leafed steel, and its decks bristled with auto-turrets that spat steam in idle warning. It flew the Commodore's flag, a stark, black hand clenched against a crimson field. It was a symbol of oppression, a promise of pain for any who defied the monolithic empire that controlled the sky. "Their escort skiffs are flying a standard delta-wing formation," Izuku murmured, his goggles sliding back down over his eyes. Lenses clicked and whirred, magnifying the distant ships. "Predictable, overconfident. They're relying on the freighter's reputation to deter attacks. They won't be expecting a full boarding action, especially not from a single ship." "A single, magnificent ship," Ida corrected, patting his console with paternal pride. "The All Might's core is stable, Captain. The primary boiler is at 105% optimal pressure. We are prepared for any maneuvers you deem necessary." "Good. Because we're not going to engage them head-on." Izuku straightened up, a spark of conviction in his green eyes that transformed him from a quiet strategist into a leader. "This isn't about destruction, it's about a message. The sky doesn't belong to the Sovereignty. It belongs to everyone. Let's go remind them." The crew of the Emerald Marauders was a small, tightly knit family, and they assembled in the main gear room, the air thick with the smell of hot oil and ozone. The All Might, a converted long-range exploration vessel, was a testament to Izuku's ingenuity. It wasn't the biggest or the most heavily armed ship in the Free Isles, but it was the fastest and most adaptable. Izuku had inherited it, a shell of its former self, and rebuilt it with his own hands, cramming it with custom inventions and unconventional modifications. He laid out the plan on a schematic of the gilded cage he'd sketched from memory and telescopic observation. His voice was calm, clear, cutting through the low hum of the ship's engine. The freighter is entering the cumulus corridor in 10 minutes. It's a dense cloud bank that will render their long-range visual scanners useless. That's our window, he began, pointing a finger at a spot on the drawing. Ida, I need everything you can give me. A full-pressure, full cowling burn the moment we enter the corridor. We need to close the distance from 5 kilometers to 200 meters in under 90 seconds. Can you do it without blowing a gasket? Ida adjusted his spectacles. The strain on the secondary boiler will be immense, Captain. The pressure conduits will whine like a dying sky whale. But they will hold. I will ensure it, Izuku nodded, turning to Ochako. The moment we're in range, you're up 0G. The freighter has 6 primary lookout posts on its dorsal deck. Standard sovereignty protocol is 2 guards per post. You'll be launched via the forward catapult. Your gravity-nullifying rig should allow you to approach silently from above. Non-lethal takedowns only. Use the soporific gas pellets. We need them asleep, not dead. Can you neutralize all 12 guards before they can raise a ship-wide alarm? Ochako cracked her knuckles, a determined grin spreading across her face. Consider it a lullaby, Captain. They won't know what hit them. Her rig, a complex harness of leather straps and glowing blue etherium conduits, was her pride and joy. It allowed her to manipulate her personal gravity field, turning a perilous fall into a gentle float. Once Ochako gives the all-clear signal, 3 green flares, that's my cue. Izuku tapped his own chest. I'll be making a solo boarding action. I'll use my grappling arm to latch onto the aft cargo bay door. From there, I'll access the ship's internal control panel, seal the bridge, and vent the main barracks with a mild sedative gas. While they're taking a nap, our crew will move in with the cargo skiffs and begin the transfer. A young crewman, a wiry boy named Koji, looked nervous. Just you, Captain? Against a full sovereignty crew? Izuku offered a small, reassuring smile. This isn't about fighting them, Koji. It's about outthinking them. Brute force is their language. We're going to speak a different one. He began his own preparations, the familiar ritual a calming balm to the pre-mission jitters. He strapped the steam-powered grappling rig to his left arm, the polished brass cool against his skin. It was his own design, a marvel of coiled springs, high-tensile cable, and a pneumatic launcher that could fire a claw-like projectile over 100 meters. He checked the pressure gauges on his Air Force boots, another of his inventions. They could store and release bursts of compressed air, allowing for short, powerful jumps, mid-air directional changes, or cushioning a long fall. They were his key to unmatched mobility. Finally, he looked at his reflection in a polished bulkhead. The earnest boy was still there, but overlaid with the grim determination of a captain who carried the hopes of countless people on his shoulders. He was ready. All right, marauders, he said, his voice ringing with newfound confidence. Let's go liberate some fruit. The All Might plunged into the cumulus corridor like a hawk diving into fog. The world outside the bridge windows dissolved into a swirling vortex of white. On the deck, the temperature dropped, and a fine mist clung to every surface. Engaging full cowling now, Captain! Ida's voice yelled over the ship's intercom, followed by a deafening roar from deep within the vessel's bowels. The ship lurched forward with a force that pressed everyone back into their seats. The deck plates vibrated violently, and the air filled with the high-pitched scream of steam being forced through pipes at unimaginable pressure. It felt as if the very soul of the ship was straining against its iron shell. Izuku held onto the tactical table, his eyes glued to the proximity sensor. The distance to the gilded cage was shrinking at an astonishing rate. 4 kilometers. 3 kilometers. She's holding. The engine is holding. Ida's triumphant shout was a testament to his genius. 1 kilometer. 500 meters. Disengaging. Releasing primary steam vents. Ida called out. The ship shuddered as it decelerated, plumes of white steam billowing from its sides and mixing with the clouds, perfectly masking their approach. They were now gliding silently, a ghost in the mist, just off the freighter's port side. Ochako, you are go! Izuku said into his comms link. On my way. See you on the other side. On the forward deck, Ochako Uraraka stood poised on the edge of the steam catapult. Taking a deep breath, she activated her rig. A soft blue glow enveloped her, and she felt a familiar, pleasant lightness settle over her body. With a nod to the launch operator, she was flung into the dense white void. For her, the world became a silent, weightless dance. The roar of the engines faded, replaced by the whisper of wind rushing past her ears. Below, the massive, opulent shape of the gilded cage materialized out of the mist. She was a silent wraith descending from the heavens. She targeted the first lookout post. 2 guards, bundled in heavy sovereignty coats, stamped their feet to keep warm, their rifles held loosely. They were bored, complacent. Ochako descended until she was just above them, a ghost in the clouds. She unclipped a small pellet from her belt, crushed it between her fingers, and dropped the fine powder. It dissipated into an invisible cloud. The guards yawned in unison, their eyes growing heavy. Within seconds they were slumping against the railing, fast asleep. 1 down. 5 to go. She moved with practiced grace, a phantom flitting from one post to another. It was a ballet of silent efficiency. Her movements were fluid, her purpose absolute. In under 2 minutes, all 12 guards were peacefully unconscious, dreaming of whatever bored soldiers dream of. Hovering over the center of the deck, she fired her flare gun. 3 emerald green stars burst against the white clouds, a silent signal of victory. Izuku saw the flares from the bridge of the All Might. That's our cue. I'm going in. Aijiro, you have the helm. Hold this position no matter what. His second in command, a young man with fiery red hair and a spirit to match, gave him a sharp, toothy grin. You can count on us, Captain. We'll be ready to pick up the groceries. Izuku ran to the port side launch bay. The wind whipped his hair as the bay door opened, revealing the swirling gray abyss and the colossal hull of the gilded cage a mere stone's throw away. He took a deep, steadying breath, the cool, moist air filling his lungs. Air Force boots, full charge, he muttered to himself, stomping once on the deck. A hiss of steam confirmed they were ready. He aimed his grappling arm, the targeting reticle in his goggles locking onto the reinforced seam of the aft cargo bay door. He fired. The claw shot out with a powerful thwump, trailing a steel cable behind it. It struck true, the durasteel talons biting deep into the freighter's hull with a screech of metal. With no hesitation, he leaped from the bay. For a heart-stopping moment, he was falling, the wind a deafening scream in his ears. Then, the cable went taut, and the retraction motor in his arm kicked in, reeling him in with bone-jarring speed. He flew across the gap, a green-clad blur against the gray clouds. He braced for impact, using his boots to absorb the shock as he slammed against the cold steel of the freighter. He clung there for a second, his heart hammering against his ribs, before finding a handhold. From here, he was a spider on a giant's wall, a place he was intimately familiar with. He quickly scaled the hull to the cargo door's external access panel. His fingers, nimble and sure, flew over the keypad, a small data probe from his tool belt sliding into the port. He wasn't a hacker in the traditional sense. He was a mechanic. He wasn't breaking the code. He was convincing the machine that he was a friendly diagnostic tool. The panel hissed open. Inside was a mess of wires and conduits. It was the ship's central nervous system. A grin touched Izuku's lips. This was his battlefield. He bypassed the cargo door's magnetic lock first. With a heavy groan, the massive door slid open, revealing the cavernous bay inside. He then spliced into the ship's internal comms and atmospheric controls. Attention, unidentified stowaway. A tinny, arrogant voice crackled from a nearby speaker. The freighter's captain. You are trespassing on sovereignty property. Surrender now, and the Commodore might show you a shred of mercy. Izuku rerouted a feedback loop. Sorry, can't hear you, he said, his voice calm and clear. There seems to be a pressure issue on your bridge. He pressed a sequence of commands. On the freighter's bridge, every vent hissed open, flooding the room with a harmless but potent sedative. The captain's threats devolved into a confused, sleepy mumble before cutting off entirely. Next, the barracks. A similar application of gas, and the bulk of the ship's security force would be out of commission without a single shot fired. He swung into the cargo bay. The sheer scale of the sovereignty's avarice was laid bare. Stacked high were gleaming white crates, each stamped with the seal of the Central Hospital. Life-saving medicine. Next to them were pallets of nutrient paste and purified water, enough to sustain a small island for months. And in the center of it all, shielded by energy fields, were the Ethereum shards, pulsing with a gentle inner light, the very lifeblood of the sky. He keyed his comm. The package is ready for collection. All clear. Within minutes, the All Might's cargo skiffs, small, nimble vessels, sipped out of the clouds and into the bay. His crew, the Emerald Marauders, swarmed in, their movements a well-oiled machine. They worked quickly, transferring the essential supplies, medicine, food, water, and a quarter of the Ethereum, to their own ship. They left the luxury fruit. That wasn't the point. As the last skiff was loading, a side door to the bay burst open. The freighter's security chief, a mountain of a man who had clearly been elsewhere when the gas was vented, stood there, a steam-powered rivet gun in his hands. He was a survivor of the gas, his face a mask of pure rage. "Pirate scum!" he roared, leveling the weapon. The crew froze. Izuku stepped between them and the chief. "There's no need for this," Izuku said, holding up a placating hand. "We're just taking what your Commodore has stolen from others." "Stolen? This is the property of the Sky Sovereignty, and you will pay for it with your life," the chief fired. The rivet, superheated and screaming through the air, was not aimed to disable. It was a killing shot. Izuku's world slowed. He didn't have time to dodge. Instead, he dropped, firing a burst from his Air Force boots to propel him forward in a low slide. The rivet flew over his head, embedding itself in a crate behind him with an explosive thwack. He slid right up to the chief's feet. Before the big man could adjust his aim, Izuku slammed the palm of his hand against the man's knee. It wasn't a punch, it was a precisely aimed trigger. A small device he'd been holding, a static discharger, released its charge. A spark of blue energy enveloped the chief's leg. His muscles seized, his leg buckled, and he went down with a surprised grunt, his rivet gun clattering to the floor. He was incapacitated, not injured. Izuku stood, dusting himself off. "Like I said," he breathed, his heart still racing. A different language. The transfer was complete. The marauders retreated to their skiffs, leaving the freighter and its sleeping crew behind. As Izuku prepared to leave, he placed a small, simple calling card on a crate of medical supplies, a single, emerald green feather. The symbol of the Emerald Marauder. The island of Atheon was a sad sight. Its central Ethereum crystal, once a vibrant beacon, was now a pale, flickering heart. The island itself listed slightly, its parks and homes looking withered and tired. The people on its streets moved with the slow, weary gait of those who have forgotten what it feels like to have enough. The arrival of the All Might changed that. As the green-accented airship descended towards the main landing platform, a murmur went through the town square. It grew into a buzz, and then a cheer. People poured out of their homes, their faces, etched with hardship, breaking into expressions of disbelief, and then joyous relief. By the time the ramp was lowered, a crowd had gathered. Izuku walked out first, blinking in the dim light of the failing crystal. "It's him! The Emerald Marauder!" a child yelled, pointing a finger. The island's elder, a woman with a face like a carved map of the skies, stepped forward, leaning heavily on a cane. "Captain Midoriya," she said, her voice raspy but full of profound gratitude. "You came. We heard you were in need, Elder Chio," Izuku said with a respectful bow of his head, feeling a familiar blush creep up his neck at the attention. The crew began unloading the supplies. Cries of joy erupted as crates of medicine were brought to the small, understocked clinic. Children stared, wide-eyed, at the nutrient paste, a luxury they hadn't seen in years. When the marauders connected the fresh Ethereum shards to the island's power grid, the great crystal in the center of town pulsed with new life. Lights across the island brightened, and the ground beneath their feet felt more stable, more solid. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the entire population. Later, as the suns began to set, casting long shadows across the revitalized town, Izuku stood on a balcony overlooking the square. A small festival was underway. Music played, and people, for the first time in a long time, were laughing. Ochako came to stand beside him, handing him a cup of warm cider. "You see that?" she said softly, gesturing to the scene below. "That's why we do this. This is better than any treasure." Izuku watched a small girl offer a piece of her ration bar to one of his crewmen. He felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the cider. He wasn't a ruler. He wasn't a king. He was just a boy with a fast ship and a belief that things could be better. But here, in this moment, seeing the direct result of their risky venture, he felt the weight of the name they had given him. The Emerald Marauder. A symbol of hope. "It is," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. His moment of peace was shattered by a crackle of static. In the center of the square, a large public voxcaster, a device for disseminating sovereignty propaganda, flickered to life. The joyful music died down as all eyes turned to the screen. The image that resolved was cold and sharp. The seal of the Commodore appeared, followed by the face of a state-sanctioned newscaster, his expression grim and his voice dripping with synthesized authority. "A public decree from the Sky Sovereignty," the newscaster announced. "In response to increased seditious activities and piracy in the Outer Rim sectors, Commodore All for One has commissioned a new flagship for the enforcement fleet. This vessel will serve as the ultimate instrument of order and stability." The screen cut to a grainy, telescopic image. It showed an airship, but it was unlike anything Izuku had ever seen. It was a monstrosity of jagged black iron, built not for speed or grace, but for pure, unadulterated menace. It seemed to suck the light out of the sky around it, its hull scarred and uneven, as if it were actively corroding. Plumes of sickly yellow smoke chuffed from its engines. "Behold, the dreadnought Decay!" The newscaster's voice continued, filled with a terrifying reverence. "Under the command of the newly promoted Admiral Tamura Shigaraki, the Decay and its specialized fleet will be deployed immediately to the Outer Rim to quell any and all unrest. Let all who would defy the Commodore's peace take heed. There is nowhere to hide in the sky. Order will be restored." The camera zoomed in on the bridge of the dreadnought. A man stood there, his face pale and scarred, his light blue hair hanging like a ragged curtain over his piercing, malevolent red eyes. A chilling, twisted smile played on his lips. This was Admiral Shigaraki. He looked less like a soldier and more like an avatar of destruction, a man who would not just defeat his enemies, but annihilate them, erase them, turn them to dust. The broadcast ended, leaving the seal of the sovereignty burning on the screen. A profound silence fell over the square. The laughter was gone. The music was gone. The hope that had filled the air moments before was replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The people of Atheon looked at each other, their faces pale with fear. They, and every other island in the Outer Rim, were the unrest the broadcast was talking about. Izuku's hands tightened on the balcony railing, his knuckles turning white. The wind had shifted. The freedom they had delivered today felt fragile, fleeting. He looked up at his ship, the All Might, a beacon of hope against the darkening sky. He had won a battle today, a clean, clever victory. But as he stared at the lingering image of the dreadnought Decay burned into his mind, he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the war was just beginning, and a much darker storm was gathering on the horizon. The transition from the open, clean expanse of the upper sky to the smog-choked reality of Tortuga Secunda was always a jarring experience. One moment, the All Might sailed through clouds as pure as spun silk. The next, it descended into a perpetual twilight of haze and industry. The very air grew thick, tasting of ozone, burnt oil, and the faint, acrid tang of the miasma that seethed miles below, a constant reminder of the world they had all abandoned. Tortuga Secunda was not so much a single island as a chaotic amalgamation of dozens of smaller land masses, derelict freighter hulls, and jury-rigged platforms, all lashed together by a spiderweb of corroded steel cables and groaning suspension bridges. It was a monument to defiance, a festering, beautiful sore on the pristine skin of the sovereignty's controlled airspace. Steam vented from 1,000 pipes in discordant hisses, gears the size of houses ground against each other with a deafening shriek, and the entire floating metropolis hummed with the combined, unstable thrum of countless Ethereum engines, all tuned to different frequencies. Atmospheric particulate count is 400% above acceptable safety levels, Tenya Ida announced from his station, his nose wrinkled in distaste as he monitored the external sensors. I recommend all shore-leave personnel be equipped with filtration masks. Izuku Midoriya, standing on the bridge, offered a small smile. We'll manage, Ida. A little grime is good for the immune system. That is a scientifically unproven and reckless assertion, Captain. Ida retorted, though the protest lacked its usual fire. He was too preoccupied, his eyes fixated on a fluctuating power gauge in the engine diagnostics. The raid on the gilded cage had been a success, but their full cowling maneuver had pushed the All Might's engine to its absolute limit. A critical component, the primary gyro stabilizer, had fractured under the strain. It was the only reason they'd risked a visit to a place like this. Docking clearance granted by Port Authority. Ochako Uraraka reported from the comms station. We've been assigned berth 7 Gamma, wedged between a Tetsu-class ore hauler and something called the Flying Stench. Charming, Izuku muttered. He took the helm, his hands moving with practiced confidence over the brass controls. Navigating the open sky was a science. Navigating Tortuga Secunda was a chaotic art form. He expertly guided the All Might through the maze of tethered ships and precarious structures, its sleek, green-accented form a stark contrast to the rust-answered aesthetic of the pirate port. With a final, gentle hiss of its maneuvering thrusters, the airship settled into its berth. The moment the gangplank was down, the sounds and smells of the port rushed in to greet them like a boisterous, drunken mob. Shouts of merchants hawking wares of questionable origin, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, and the discordant melodies of at least 3 different sea shanties spilling from nearby taverns all blended into a unique, overwhelming symphony of lawlessness. All right, Izuku said, pulling his goggles down around his neck. Ida, you and I will head to the Cogsworth Exchange. They're the most likely to have a Mark IV cryo-cooled gyro stabilizer. Ochako, you take Koji and Tsuyu and handle resupplying. Stick to the main promenades, and don't buy any genuine dragon jerky. Let's reconvene here in 3 hours. Aye, Captain. Ochako grinned, clipping a small, canister-like sidearm to her belt. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, but a miniaturized grappling hook launcher, useful for navigating crowds and, if necessary, making a quick exit. As Izuku and Ida stepped onto the grimy steel of the promenade, the sheer, vibrant chaos of Tortuga Secunda enveloped them. Sky sailors of every conceivable species and creed thronged the walkways. A hulking, four-armed mollusca haggled fiercely over the price of a crate of glowing fungi. A lithe, cat-like Kitterin, her tail twitching, tested the edge of a newly forged cutlass. The air was thick with freedom and danger in equal measure, a place where you could find anything you desired, or lose everything you had. They navigated the crowded market, Ida's rigid posture and pristine uniform drawing more than a few amused glances from the local ruffians. He looked utterly out of place, a gleaming cog in a pile of rusted scrap. Izuku, however, moved with a quiet, observant confidence, his eyes constantly scanning, analyzing, taking in every detail. Their path was abruptly blocked. A rival crew, loud and swaggering, shoved their way through the crowd. They were clad in scorched black leather, and jarring shades of orange, their gear adorned with stylized explosion motifs. They moved with an arrogance that parted the sea of pirates before them. These were the Nitros, and leading them, his hands shoved deep in his pockets and a belligerent scowl fixed on his face, was their captain, Katsuki Bikugo. His spiky, ash-blonde hair was unmistakable, as were the massive, grenade-shaped gauntlets he wore on his forearms. They weren't just for show. They were custom-built weapons that collected and ignited his own volatile, nitroglycerin-like sweat, allowing him to propel himself through the air on controlled blasts or unleash devastating explosive attacks. His ship, the Great Explosion, was a monster of an assault vessel, prioritizing firepower over everything else, much like its captain. Bakugo stopped dead when he saw Izuku, his crimson eyes narrowing. A cruel smirk spread across his face. Well, he snarled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. If it isn't the charity case. I should have known I smelled a goody two-shoes. He deliberately spat on the metal walkway, just inches from Izuku's boot. Izuku sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. Hello, Kaken. It's been a while, not long enough. Bakugo shot back, stepping forward until he was almost chest to chest with Izuku. He was taller, broader, radiating an aggressive heat that made the air around him feel thin. "I heard you hit the gilded cage. Stole a bunch of fruit and medicine and gave it away to some dirt scratchers on a falling rock. How pathetic. A real pirate takes for himself. He builds power, he inspires fear. All you do is hand out scraps and inspire group hugs." Some of his crew, a lanky man with a manic grin and a woman with vibrant pink hair, snickered behind him. Ida stepped forward, his hand chopping the air in indignation. "That is an inaccurate and malicious mischaracterization of our mission. Captain Midoriya's strategic redistribution of illicitly hoarded sovereignty resources is a noble endeavor that fosters stability and hope in the oppressed Outer Rim sectors." Bakugo just laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Listen to your little tin soldier, Deku. You've got him so brainwashed he actually believes the garbage you spew." He jabbed a thumb at his own chest. "Me? My crew knows the score. We take what we want. We're the strongest. That's the only rule in this sky that matters." Something a useless, sentimental nerd like you would never understand. The old nickname, Deku, still stung, a ghost from a past Izuku tried to leave behind. But he kept his composure, his gaze steady. "We have different philosophies, Kaken. That's all." "Philosophies?" Bakugo's smirk turned into a feral grin. "Here's my philosophy." His gauntlets began to emit a faint, sweet smell of burning sugar and a thin wisp of smoke. The temperature around him rose palpably. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to back away, forming a wide circle around them. "Maybe I should give you a live demonstration," Bakugo growled, his hands clenching into fists. Before Izuku could respond, a heavy, metallic clang echoed through the promenade. A massive, steam-powered automaton, its single optic lens glowing a baleful red, stepped between the two crews. It was one of the port wardens, the hulking enforcers of Tortuga Secunda's one and only sacred law: cease hostilities. Its voice boomed, a synthesized sound amplified by a brass voice box. "Violation of the Tortuga Accord, Article 1, no bloodshed on public promenades, will result in immediate detention and asset seizure." Bakugo glared at the automaton, the smoke from his gauntlets thickening. For a moment, it looked as though he might actually challenge the machine, but even he wasn't reckless enough to get on the wrong side of the port authority. With a frustrated hiss, the smoke subsided. He turned his glare back to Izuku, his eyes burning with frustrated rage. "Saved by the glorified teakettle, Deku. You always were lucky." His eyes then darted over Izuku's shoulder and fixed on something. A stall in the Cogsworth Exchange, displayed on a velvet cloth, gleaming under a spotlight, was a brand new Mark IV cryo-cooled hero stabilizer. The exact part Ida needed. A wicked, new idea dawned on Bakugo's face. He shoved past Izuku, storming over to the stall. "How much for the stabilizer?" He barked at the merchant. The merchant, a nervous-looking man with 4 eyes, stammered. That's a rare piece, Captain Bakugo. Top of the line. 10,000 sovereignty credits. I'll take it," Bakugo said, tossing a heavy pouch of coins onto the counter without even counting them. He snatched the delicate piece of machinery. Ida's face fell. "No! Captain, that was the only one!" Bakugo sauntered back to Izuku, dangling the Euro stabilizer from his fingers. "Looking for this, nerd? Tough luck. Finders keepers." Izuku's jaw tightened. This was a deliberate, petty act of malice. "What do you want, Kaken?" "I want to prove to this whole stinking port what a fraud you are," Bakugo said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you're so smart with your fancy plans and your non-lethal takedowns, but when it comes to real skill, raw piloting talent, you're nothing. So here's the deal." He gestured with his head towards the edge of the port, where a series of rusting, decommissioned freighter hulls and industrial wreckage were tethered together, forming a deep, treacherous chasm known as the Iron Canyons. "You and me. A skiff race. 1 lap through the canyons. No rules, no weapons, just flying. You win." He tossed the stabilizer in the air and caught it. "You get this. I win, you and your crew get the hell out of my port and admit, in front of everyone in the Leaky Boiler Tavern, that my way is better." The challenge hung in the air, thick and heavy. It was a classic Bakugo move, arrogant, public, and designed to humiliate. Ida looked at Izuku, his expression a mixture of desperation and worry. They needed that part. Izuku looked from the stabilizer in Bakugo's hand to the furious glint in his rival's eyes. This wasn't just about a race or an engine part anymore. It was about pride. It was about their two opposing ideologies clashing head-on. Fine, Izuku said, his voice quiet but firm. You're on. The starting line for the race was a precarious platform extending over the lip of the iron canyons. The chasm was a pilot's nightmare, a vertical maze of jagged metal, unexpected steam vents, and massive, slowly rotating gears from some long-dead industrial machine. A crowd of pirates had gathered, placing bets and jeering, eager for a spectacle. Their skiffs were a perfect reflection of their pilots. Bakugo's was the blast runner, a stripped-down frame built around a massive, overpowered engine. It was painted in aggressive orange and black, with exhaust pipes that looked more like cannon barrels. It was a machine built for one purpose: to go forward, incredibly fast, with explosive force. Izuku's skiff, the Green Comet, was smaller and sleeker. It was a one-man vessel he had built himself from the salvaged remains of a Sovereignty scout ship. Its engine was finely tuned for maneuverability and responsiveness rather than raw thrust, and its dashboard was a custom array of analytical gauges and trajectory predictors. It was a scalpel to Bakugo's sledgehammer. Ochako and Ida stood by Izuku as he made his final checks. His engine has at least 30% more raw thrust, Captain, Ida noted, his voice tight with anxiety. On the straightaways, he will be unbeatable. Your only chance is to utilize your superior agility within the most treacherous sections of the canyon. I know, Izuku said, strapping himself into the pilot's seat. I'm not trying to beat him at his own game. I'm going to play mine. He gave Ochako a confident nod. Don't worry. I've got this. At the other end of the platform, Bakugo revved his engine, sending a plume of black smoke and a deafening roar across the platform. He shot Izuku a look of pure contempt. Get ready to eat my dust, Deku! A large, greasy pirate fired a flare gun into the air. The race had begun. With a sound like a controlled detonation, Bakugo's blast runner shot off the line. He used a short, powerful burst from his gauntlets to give himself an extra push, a move that was technically against the no-weapons rule but perfectly within the spirit of the no-rules one. He was a fiery orange blur, disappearing into the canyons almost instantly, leaving Izuku's Green Comet in a cloud of exhaust. He's already half a click ahead! Ida exclaimed, horrified. Izuku didn't panic. He eased the comet forward, his movements smooth and deliberate. He wasn't looking at the empty space where Bakugo had been. His eyes, aided by his analytical goggles, were scanning the canyon itself. He was reading the wind currents, mapping the obstacles, and letting his mind process the chaotic environment into a coherent, navigable path. He entered the canyon, the sheer walls of rust and iron rising up on either side. He could hear the distant echo of Bakugo's engine, a series of concussive booms as he no doubt blasted his way through smaller pieces of debris rather than flying around them. Izuku, however, weaved. His skiff danced through the wreckage, a graceful, fluid dance. He tilted his craft on its side to slip through a narrow gap between two freighter hulls, a maneuver Bakugo's wider skiff couldn't have managed. He used the draft from a massive cooling fan to slingshot himself around a tight corner, gaining a burst of speed without burning extra fuel. He was gaining, but Bakugo was still far ahead. Up ahead lay the most dangerous section of the course, a part of the canyon known as the gear grinder. It was a bottleneck where several colossal, interlocking gears from an ancient power generator still turned, their movements slow but inexorable. The gaps between their teeth were just large enough for a skiff to pass through, but the timing had to be perfect. One mistake meant being crushed into scrap metal. Izuku saw the blast runner up ahead. Bakugo wasn't even trying to time it. He was trying to brute force his way through a larger, more obvious gap above the main gears. But a steam pipe, weakened by age and the vibrations, had burst from his engine's roar, and now a thick cloud of superheated steam obscured his vision. He was forced to slow down, roaring in frustration. This was Izuku's chance. His goggles analyzed the rotation speed of the gears, the pressure in the steam vents, the structural integrity of the supports. 1,000 calculations ran through his mind in a fraction of a second. He saw it, a path. A tiny, fleeting window of opportunity. Come on, baby, he whispered to his skiff. He pushed the throttle forward, not aiming for the obvious path, but for a smaller, more complex route through the heart of the grinding machinery. He flew towards a massive, descending gear tooth. The crowd gasped. It looked like a suicide run. But just as he was about to be flattened, he fired a burst from his port side maneuvering thruster. The green comet flipped onto its side, sliding through a gap no wider than the skiff itself with inches to spare. He then navigated 2 more interlocking gears, his flight a perfect, synchronized ballet with the colossal machine. He emerged on the other side, the roar of the gear grinder behind him. He was now in the lead. Bakugo, having finally navigated the steam cloud, saw the green skiff ahead of him. A sound of pure, undiluted rage echoed through the canyon. It was a wordless scream of fury. He pushed his engine to its breaking point. The blast runner, belching fire and smoke, became a projectile. He was closing the distance at an insane speed. The final stretch was a relatively straight shot back to the finish line. Bakugo's superior power was eating away at Izuku's hard-won lead. The finish line was in sight. Bakugo was right on his tail, close enough that Izuku could feel the heat from his engine. He was going to lose. Raw power was about to triumph, unless... Izuku's eyes darted around, his mind racing. He saw it. To his left, a large, cylindrical conduit ran along the canyon wall. It was a primary exhaust vent for the port's central smelter. According to the schematics he'd memorized before landing, it was on a 20-second cycle. He glanced at the chronometer on his dashboard. The vent was due to release in 3, 2, 1. Instead of flying straight for the finish, Izuku veered sharply to the left, directly towards the canyon wall. "What is that idiot doing?" Bakugo bellowed, confused by the sudden, illogical maneuver. A massive port on the conduit hissed open, and a torrent of pressurized, non-toxic steam erupted outwards. Izuku positioned the green comet perfectly. The blast caught the back of his skiff, not as an obstacle, but as a massive, powerful thruster. He was thrown forward with incredible force, a green bullet fired from a steam-powered cannon. He shot across the finish line a full 2 skiff lengths ahead of Bakugo. He brought the skiff to a screeching, shuddering halt on the platform, his knuckles white on the controls and his heart pounding like a drum. He had won. Silence fell over the crowd, quickly replaced by a roar of cheers and groans as bets were paid out. Bakugo landed his skiff moments later, the landing less of a controlled stop and more of a controlled crash. He ripped his helmet off, his face contorted in a mask of incandescent fury. He stomped over to Izuku, who was just climbing out of his cockpit, his legs a little shaky. For a second, Izuku thought Bakugo might actually break the port's number 1 rule. But instead, Bakugo just stared at him, his chest heaving. The humiliation of the defeat was warring with his own twisted, violent code of honor. With a curse that was more of a guttural roar, he unclipped the cryo-cooled gyro-stabilizer from his belt and threw it hard. Izuku fumbled the catch, but managed to hold onto it. It was cool to the touch, and hummed with latent power. It was perfect. "You didn't win! You got lucky!" Bakugo snarled, jabbing a finger in Izuku's face. "You used the damn scenery! That's a coward's move." "It was a smart move," Izuku replied, his voice even. "You rely on power, Kaken. You forget to look around. The sky has more to offer than just a headwind." Bakugo looked like he wanted to argue, to scream, to explode. But he couldn't. He had lost on his own terms. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed back to his crew, shoving them roughly towards their ship. "This doesn't prove anything, Deku!" he yelled over his shoulder. "Next time, I'll blast you and your rust bucket out of the sky." As they disappeared into the crowd, Ida and Ochako rushed over. Ida took the stabilizer from Izuku's hands with the reverence of a priest handling a holy relic. "It's flawless! The craftsmanship is impeccable," he declared, his earlier anxiety completely replaced by pure, unadulterated engineering joy. "Captain, your piloting was unorthodox, hazardous, and bordered on the suicidal, but the results are undeniable. I will have this installed immediately." He scurried off towards the All Might, cradling the component like a newborn baby. Ochako simply punched Izuku lightly on the arm. "You showed him, Captain. You really did." Izuku rubbed his arm, a genuine, tired smile on his face. Yeah, I guess I did. Later that evening, the three of them sat in a quiet corner of the leaky boiler, celebrating their victory with mugs of frothy ale. The tavern was noisy and chaotic, but their table felt like a small pocket of calm. While Ochako and Ida recounted the highlights of the race, Izuku found his attention drifting. His senses, always on high alert, picked up on a hushed, serious conversation from a nearby table. Two old, grizzled pirates, their faces weathered like ancient maps, were leaning in close, their voices low. "Strangling it, I tell ya!" one of them rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper. "A full sovereignty blockade. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out." "Island?" the other asked. "What's so special about that rock? Always thought it was just a bunch of eggheads and their toys." "More than toys, mate. They say David Shield built something unnatural. A power source. They call it the hard drive. All for one wants it bad, willing to starve a whole island of geniuses to get his grubby hands on it. It's a fool's errand to even think about it." The first pirate grunted, taking a long drink. "Running that blockade would be suicide. You'd be up against a whole fleet, and for what? To help a bunch of scientists who've never done a thing for us." Izuku's good mood evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. "Island. David Shield. A blockade. A whole island of people being held hostage. The victory over Bakugo, the acquisition of the engine part, it all felt small and insignificant now. Trivial. While they were settling personal scores and running reckless races for pride, an entire community was being slowly crushed under the sovereignty's iron fist. Ochako noticed the change in his expression. "Captain? What is it?" Izuku didn't answer immediately. His gaze was distant, looking past the grimy walls of the tavern, past the chaotic sprawl of Tortuga Secunda, and out into the vast, open sky. A new vector was being calculated in his mind. A new destination was taking shape. "Get the crew ready," he said finally, his voice low but filled with a new, unshakable purpose. "We're setting a new course." The All Might left Tortuga Secunda under the bruised purple light of a rising gas giant, its newly installed gyro stabilizer purring with a smooth, reassuring hum deep within its metallic heart. The chaotic port, with its symphony of grinding gears and roaring furnaces, shrank behind them, becoming just another constellation of grimy lights in the endless dark. They ascended into the clean, cold strat currents, the ship slicing through the thin air with a renewed sense of purpose. Izuku Midoriya stood on the observation deck, a small, glass-domed chamber at the highest point of the ship. Below him, the curved hull of the All Might spread out like the wings of a great, green-streaked bird. Above, the star-dusted velvet of the celestial sea was unobscured by smog or cloud. It was his sanctuary, the one place where the constant whirring of his mind could find a moment of quiet focus. But tonight there was no quiet. His mind was a storm, replaying the snippets of conversation he'd overheard in the leaky boiler. A full sovereignty blockade, starving a whole island, the hard drive. Island was more than just a name to him. It was a legend. A beacon of scientific progress and neutrality in a sky increasingly defined by conflict and oppression. David Shield was a genius, a visionary whose inventions in Ethereum energy and atmospheric stabilization had benefited countless independent islands. He was a hero in Izuku's eyes, a man who used his intellect not for power or wealth, but for the betterment of all. The idea of him, of his entire community, being held under the thumb of the sovereignty felt like a personal affront. A soft chime from the bridge's speaking tube broke his reverie. "Captain!" Ochako's voice echoed, tinged with curiosity. "Long-range sensors are picking up a small, fast-moving object on an intercept course. Signature is, well, it's tiny. And erratic." Izuku's brow furrowed. "Pirate torpedo? Sovereignty probe? Neither. It's too small for a weapon, and the heat signature is all wrong for a military drone. It almost looks like, well, you should see for yourself." He made his way back to the bridge, where the crew had gathered around the main sensor console. On the screen, a tiny speck of light was zigzagging toward them, leaving a sputtering trail of exhaust. It moved with a desperate, unsteady energy, like a firefly caught in a gale. "It appears to be a modified signal flare, Captain," Ida observed, peering at the readings through his spectacles. "Propulsion system is unstable, And the guidance fins are those fashioned from sheet metal and hope? The craftsmanship is appallingly crude, but it's definitely heading for us. Eijiro Kurishima, the ship's helmsman, added, his sharp eyes fixed on the screen. It's like it knows we're here. Bring us to a stop. Power down non-essential systems. Let's see what it wants, Izuku ordered. He felt a strange premonition, a tightening in his gut that told him this was no random piece of space junk. This was something significant. The All Might slowed to a gentle drift, its engines falling into a low thrum. The small object, now visible to the naked eye as a sputtering streak of fire, continued its approach. It spiraled wildly, its makeshift engine coughing and dying, before finally tumbling end over end and impacting the forward observation window with a soft, metallic thunk. It wasn't a flare. It was a small, crudely fashioned rocket, no bigger than Izuku's forearm. It was dented and scorched from its journey, its fins bent out of shape. Attached to its side with heavy-duty clamps was a silver cylinder, on which the symbol of Island, a stylized gear intersecting with an atom, was faintly visible. A message canister, Ochako breathed, her eyes wide. Carefully, Koji, the ship's most agile crewman, was sent out on a tether to retrieve the object. He brought it back to the bridge, handling it as if it were an unexploded bomb. The moment he set it on the tactical table, the cylinder hissed, a small panel sliding open to reveal a hidden projector lens. A cone of shimmering blue light shot out, coalescing in the air above the table. The light formed a three-dimensional image, a holographic projection of a young woman's face. She had blonde hair tied back in a practical, messy ponytail, and intelligent, blue eyes that were wide with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. She wore oil-stained mechanics coveralls, and a smudge of grease was smeared across her cheek. The image flickered, distorted by static, but the urgency in her expression was crystal clear. Izuku recognized her instantly from scientific journals and news broadcasts. Melissa Shield. David Shield's daughter, and a brilliant inventor in her own right. This is a broadcast on a secured, wide-spectrum channel. Her voice, tinny and laced with static, filled the bridge. If anyone is receiving this, please, we need help. This is Melissa Shield, transmitting from Island. She took a shaky breath, her holographic eyes seeming to plead with them directly. The Sky Sovereignty has established a full-scale military blockade around our home. No ships in, no ships out. They have cut off all supply lines, food, water, and most critically, unrefined Ethereum for our reactors. The bridge was silent, every member of the Emerald Marauders captivated by the desperate plea. Commodore All for One has issued an ultimatum. Melissa continued, her voice trembling with barely controlled anger. He is demanding we surrender the hard drive, an experimental energy source developed by my father. He claims it is for the security of the skies. But that's a lie. He wants it for himself, to control, to weaponize. Her image flickered violently. She glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting to be discovered at any moment. When she looked back, her expression was even more desperate. The media broadcasts are all lies. They paint us as traitors, as hoarding dangerous technology. But the hard drive isn't a weapon. It's the only thing keeping our island afloat. Our island is not a natural landmass. It's a colossal, intricate machine. Every system, from atmospheric recycling to gravitational stability, is powered by and synchronized with the hard drive. Without it, our home will suffer a catastrophic systems failure. The island, it will fall out of the sky. A collective gasp went through the crew. Ida's face paled, the full engineering horror of her words hitting him first. A total systems collapse on that scale, the energy backlash would be apocalyptic. He is holding 100,000 innocent lives hostage, Melissa said, a tear finally tracing a clean path through the grease on her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. The Sovereignty fleet is overwhelming. We have defensive shields, but they can't last forever under a sustained bombardment. They're starving us out, waiting for us to break. We have sent out dozens of these message rockets, hoping one would break through their sensor net. Her gaze seemed to intensify, as if she could see them through the holographic display. Her next words were a desperate whisper, a prayer cast out into the void. We need a miracle. The legends of the Outer Rim speak of a crew, of a captain who fights for the free people of the skies. They call him the Emerald Marauder. Her eyes locked onto where Izuku was standing. If you are out there, if you can hear this, I am begging you. Help us. You are our only hope. The image dissolved into a shower of blue static, and the projector lens went dark. The silver cylinder on the table gave a final, soft hiss and fell silent. For a long moment, the only sound on the bridge was the gentle hum of the ship's systems. The weight of Melissa Shield's words settled over them, heavy and suffocating. This was no longer a rumor overheard in a pirate tavern. This was a direct, desperate plea for help from the heart of the crisis. Ochako was the first to speak, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. To lay siege to a civilian island, to threaten to let it fall, that's not governance. That's pure evil. It is a tactic of absolute terror. Ida added, adjusting his glasses with a shaky hand. Logically, a direct confrontation with a sovereignty blockade of that magnitude is tactical suicide. The risk assessment is overwhelmingly negative. He was right, and Izuku knew it. Running a military blockade was a fool's game. The sovereignty would have cruisers, destroyers, and a screen of fighter skiffs. They would control the skies for 100 kilometers in every direction. The All Might was fast and agile, but it wasn't invincible. Going up against a full fleet would be like a hawk trying to fight a squadron of dragons. He looked around at his crew. He saw the grim set of Eijiro's jaw, the compassionate worry in Ochako's eyes, the conflict between logic and morality on Ida's face. They were all looking at him, waiting. His word was law on this ship. He could order them to turn around, to fly for the relative safety of the Free Isles, and they would obey. It would be the smart thing to do. The safe thing. But then he saw Melissa's face again in his mind's eye. The desperation, the fear, and the flicker of hope when she spoke his name. The Emerald Marauder. A name he hadn't chosen, but one that had been given to him by the people he'd helped. A name that came with a responsibility he had never asked for, but now felt branded onto his soul. What was the point of their raids, of redistributing supplies and tweaking the nose of the sovereignty, if they were going to turn their backs when an entire island of innocent people was facing annihilation? Their small acts of defiance would be meaningless, hollow gestures in the face of such calculated cruelty. His decision wasn't even a conscious choice. It was a fundamental, instinctual reaction. A fire ignited in his chest, burning away the fear and the doubt. Ida, he said, his voice cutting through the silence with a newfound clarity and resolve. What is our current fuel and supply status? Ida blinked, surprised by the question. Our raid on the Gilded Cage and our resupply at Tortuga Secunda have left us at 95% capacity. We are well stocked for a long-range voyage. And the engine? Izuku asked, his eyes already turning to the navigational chart. How is the new stabilizer holding up? It is performing flawlessly, Captain. Ida admitted, a flicker of understanding dawning in his eyes. It has increased our engine's efficiency by a calculated 12%. Our top speed should be marginally improved, and our maneuverability in high-stress situations will be significantly more stable. Izuku nodded, a slow, determined gesture. He turned to face his crew, his green eyes burning with an intensity they hadn't seen since the moments before the Gilded Cage raid. Melissa Shield asked for the Emerald Marauder, he said, his voice low but ringing with conviction. She didn't ask for a coward, she didn't ask for someone who would weigh the odds and decide it was too risky. She asked for help. He took a deep breath. I know what I'm asking. This will be the most dangerous thing we have ever attempted. The chances of success are small. The chances of us being shot out of the sky are significantly higher. There is no treasure at the end of this, no profit to be made. There is only an island full of people who are counting on us. He met each of their gazes, one by one. I will not order anyone to go on this mission. If you want to transfer to a transport skiff at the next neutral outpost, you will be free to do so, with a full share of our funds and my gratitude for your service. There is no shame in choosing to live to fight another day. He paused, letting his words sink in. The silence on the bridge was different now. It wasn't tense or uncertain. It was profound, charged with unspoken loyalty. Ochako broke it with a small, fierce smile. I'm not going anywhere, Captain. Someone needs to be there to catch you when you jump off a perfectly good airship with one of your crazy plans. Ijiro slammed a hardened fist into his palm. Running from a fight against bullies who are picking on innocent people? That's not manly at all. I'm with you, Captain, to the end. Ida pushed his glasses up his nose, his back ramrod straight. While the tactical probabilities remain concerning, he said, his voice stiff with formality but unwavering in its support, the ethical imperative is clear. The primary function of a superior engine is to transport its crew to where they are needed most. And it is clear we are needed at Island. I will ensure the All Might performs at maximum capacity. One by one, every crew member on the bridge voiced their assent. Not with loud shouts, but with quiet, firm nods and determined expressions. They were a family. And they would not abandon people in need. A wave of profound gratitude washed over Izuku, so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He had built this ship, but they had built this crew. Their trust in him was the most valuable thing he possessed. All right then, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He turned to the helm and pointed to a set of coordinates on the holographic star chart, a point of light in the heavily patrolled sector designated as Sovereignty Core Space. Set a course for Island. Maximum cruising speed. Let's go give the Sovereignty a miracle they won't forget. The journey to Island was a tense, focused affair. The All Might flew under a strict sensor silence, using nebulae and asteroid fields as cover, following a circuitous route Izuku had plotted to avoid major Sovereignty patrol lanes. The mood on the ship was sober, the usual light-hearted banter replaced by a quiet, shared determination. Izuku barely slept. He spent his time in the ship's library, a small room crammed with technical manuals, historical star charts, and tactical treatises. He cross-referenced everything he knew about Sovereignty fleet formations, cruiser weapon ranges, and standard blockade protocols. He read eyewitness accounts of past naval engagements, memorizing the tactics of famous Sovereignty admirals, looking for patterns, weaknesses, anything he could exploit. He knew that a direct assault was impossible. They couldn't fight the fleet. So, they had to be smarter. They had to be faster. They had to be a ghost. His plan began to form, not as a single, brilliant stroke, but as a series of interconnected, high-risk maneuvers. It was a delicate, intricate clockwork mechanism of a plan, where every gear had to turn at the exact right moment, or the whole thing would fly apart. He called his senior staff, Ochako, Ida, and Ijiro, to the tactical room. The holographic table in the center of the room displayed a detailed map of the space around Island, the Sovereignty blockade represented by a dense, menacing ring of red icons. This is the fist of the Commodore, Izuku began, gesturing to the blockade. Standard formation. An outer screen of light, fast destroyers to intercept any approaching ships, a middle ring of heavy cruisers with long-range cannons to provide overwhelming firepower, and an inner ring of close support frigates and fighter skiffs to maintain a tight perimeter around the island itself. It's designed to be impenetrable. A wall of iron and fire, Ijiro muttered, looking at the sheer number of enemy ships. Exactly, Izuku said. And we can't break through it. So we're going to fly over it. He zoomed in on a section of space near the blockade. Weather reports and long-range atmospheric scans show a massive, volatile ether storm forming here, in the Serpent's Veil Nebula. It's scheduled to pass directly over the blockade's northern quadrant in 3 days. Ida's eyes widened. Captain, you cannot be serious! Flying through an ether storm of that magnitude is... The atmospheric turbulence and electromagnetic interference would tear the ship apart. Not if we're prepared, Izuku countered, his finger tracing a path through the swirling storm on the map. The interference will blind their long-range sensors. The turbulence will provide cover from visual identification. They'll be hunkered down, riding out the storm, not expecting anyone to be insane enough to use it as cover. He looked at Ida. I need you to reinforce the ship's kinetic plating. Reroute auxiliary power to the structural integrity fields. I need the All Might to be able to withstand the worst storm of its life. Can you do it? Ida adjusted his glasses, a frantic, excited gleam in his eyes. The engineer in him was already seeing the challenge, the sheer, beautiful impossibility of it. The stress calculations are astronomical, It will require a complete overhaul of the power distribution system. It will be exhilarating. Yes, Captain, it can be done. Izuku then turned to Ochako. The storm will get us close, but we still need to make the final approach. Once we're through the worst of it, we'll still have to deal with the inner ring of frigates. That's where you come in. We're going to perform a high-altitude gravity drop. Ochako blinked. A what? We ascend to the upper edge of the atmosphere, directly above the island. Ida will cut the main engines and divert all Ethereum power to your personal rig, supercharging it. You'll use your gravity nullification ability on the entire ship. The audacity of the idea hung in the air. Ochako stared at him, her mind racing to comprehend the physics. You want me to make the whole All Might weightless? The power required will be immense, Izuku finished. But it will allow us to fall silently, a ghost ship descending from the heavens. No engine signature, no heat trail. We'll drop right through the middle of their fleet before they even know we're there. When we reach the lower atmosphere, Ida will reignite the engines, and Aijiro will bring us in for a landing. It's the only way to get through without a fight. Aijiro's eyes were wide with a mix of terror and awe. That's the craziest, most manly plan I have ever heard in my life. The plan was insane. It relied on perfect timing, untested technology, and a healthy dose of sheer, dumb luck. It was a plan born of desperation and genius in equal measure, but looking at the determined set of Izuku's jaw, they knew it was their only shot. For the next 3 days, the All Might became a hive of frantic activity. Ida and his engineering team worked around the clock, welding extra plating onto the hull and rerouting power conduits until the engine room looked like a tangled web of glowing copper. Ochako spent hours in the ship's small zero-gravity training chamber, calibrating her rig and practicing manipulating the gravity of larger and larger objects, preparing herself for the immense strain of lifting a multi-ton warship. Izuku, his work on the plan done, moved through the ship like a reassuring presence. He helped the engineers, drilled the bridge crew on emergency storm protocols, and spent time with every member of his crew, answering their questions, calming their fears, and reminding them why they were doing this. He was their captain, and his quiet, unshakable confidence became their own. On the 3rd day, the storm appeared on their sensors, a swirling vortex of violet energy and crackling lightning. It was even bigger and more violent than the forecasts had predicted. It was a monster, a true tempest of the skies. Izuku stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the helm. He looked at his crew, their faces illuminated by the flashing red alert lights. They were scared, but they were ready. Report, he said, his voice steady. Kinetic plating is secure, structural integrity field is at maximum power. Ida announced. All loose items secured. Crew is strapped in. Ochako confirmed. Helm is responsive, Captain. She's ready to dance? Aijiro said, giving him a sharp-toothed grin. Izuku took one last look at the calm, starry expanse before them, then at the raging celestial monster they were about to enter. He thought of Melissa Shield's desperate plea, of the 100,000 lives hanging in the balance. All right, marauders, he said, his voice ringing with a strength that defied the coming storm. Let's go make some thunder. With a final, powerful surge from its engines, the All Might plunged headfirst into the raging heart of the ether storm. The All Might sailed on the edge of the abyss. To port, the serene, stardusted black of open space. To starboard, the roiling, violent heart of the Serpent's Veil ether storm. It was a terrifyingly beautiful sight. Jagged forks of violet and emerald lightning, each miles long, clawed at the darkness within the nebula's dense clouds. The storm didn't roar. It hummed with a deep, guttural frequency that vibrated through the hull of the ship, a constant, menacing reminder of the power they were about to challenge. This was the staging ground. The final moment of peace before they plunged into chaos. For the next few hours, the ship was a bubble of focused, purposeful calm, a stark contrast to the celestial fury brewing just beyond the viewports. This was Izuku Midoriya's element. The battle had not yet begun, but the war was already being waged here, in the quiet intensity of the ship's tactical room. The space, affectionately nicknamed the War Room by the crew, was Izuku's sanctum. One wall was a massive, transparent data slate, currently displaying a three-dimensional, rotating schematic of the Sovereignty blockade, updated in real time with passive sensor data. Another was covered in corkboard, pinned with hand-drawn charts of wind shear, atmospheric pressure gradients, and the projected paths of the storm's most violent energy cells. The central holographic table was a flurry of light, displaying their intended flight path as a single, impossibly thin green line weaving through a maelstrom of angry red energy signatures. Izuku stood before it all, a conductor preparing for a symphony of controlled chaos. He wore a simple gray jumpsuit, his usual captain's coat draped over a chair. His analytical goggles were pushed up on his forehead, but their reflection in the data slate showed the lenses were still active, feeding him a constant stream of information. He hadn't slept in what felt like days, subsisting on nutrient paste and a potent, bitter-to-eat brewed for moments of extreme engineering focus. His eyes were shadowed with fatigue, but they burned with a feverish, unwavering light. His mutterings were a low, constant stream of consciousness, a verbal manifestation of the 1,000 calculations running through his mind. If we enter at vector 7 gamma, the initial electromagnetic pulse will be severe, but it should mask our engine signature from the outer destroyer screen. But the gravitational shear at that entry point is a high-risk factor. It could put too much strain on the port side integrity field. A safer entry is at vector 9 delta, but that brings us closer to the patrol route of the Iron Justice. Their long-range gravimetric sensors are top of the line. Could they get a ghost reading through the interference? Unlikely, but not impossible. The probability matrix suggests a 78.4% chance of success with the gamma vector, versus an 82.1% chance with delta, but the consequences of failure are exponentially higher with gamma. He was so engrossed he didn't hear the door to the war room hiss open. Ochako Uraraka stepped inside, carrying 2 steaming mugs. The rich, earthy smell of roasted chicory root cut through the sterile, ozone-tinged air of the room. She placed one mug on a rare clear spot on the table next to his elbow. "If you keep that up, you're going to burn a hole in the floor just by thinking too hard," she said softly. Izuku jumped, startled out of his trance. He blinked, his focus slowly shifting from the holographic battlefield to her warm, concerned face. "Ochako, I didn't hear you come in." "I know," she said, her smile gentle. "You were in the zone. But even a genius needs to refuel." She nudged the mug closer to him. "It's not Ida's rocket fuel. Just something to keep you warm." He wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic, the simple heat a welcome anchor to reality. He took a sip, the taste rich and calming. "Thank you. How's it looking?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the terrifying display of red icons and swirling energy patterns. She understood the basics of his plan, but seeing it laid out like this, the sheer, overwhelming odds made her stomach clench. "It's tight," Izuku admitted, his shoulders slumping with the weight of his fatigue. "The plan is sound in theory. But there are 1,000 variables. A single, unexpectedly powerful lightning strike, a stronger-than-projected gravity wave, one lucky sensor ping from a sovereignty ship, any one of them could bring this all down." His gaze drifted to the schematic of the All Might on the data slate, a single, fragile vessel against the storm and the fleet. "I'm asking everyone to put their lives on the line based on my calculations, based on a theory. If I've missed something, if I've miscalculated..." He trailed off, the unspoken fear hanging heavy in the air. Ochako stepped closer, her expression firm. She reached out and rested her hand on his arm. "Izuku, look at me." He met her eyes. They were clear, steady, and filled with an unshakable faith that humbled him. "We're not following your calculations. We're following you. We believe in this mission because we believe in our captain. You have never led us astray. You get us through this with your brain, yes, but it's your heart that got us here in the first place. Don't ever forget that." Her words were a balm to his frayed nerves. He gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Ochako. I needed that." "I know," she said, squeezing his arm gently before letting go. "Now, while you're up here playing with lightning, the rest of us have been busy. There's something you should see." She led him out of the war room and down towards the ship's engineering and research deck. The normally quiet corridor was a hive of activity. Crew members were double-checking seals on pressure suits, running final diagnostics on their personal gear, and securing everything that wasn't bolted down. The air hummed not with fear, but with a focused, professional energy. Everyone had a job to do, a part to play in the grand, dangerous machine of Izuku's plan. Their first stop was the main engine room. The vast, cathedral-like space was hotter and louder than ever. Ida and his team were like high priests officiating a complex, dangerous ritual. They moved with practiced efficiency along catwalks that crisscrossed over the heart of the ship, the massive, glowing Ethereum crystal that powered their lives. The new Eurostabilizer, Bakugo's unwilling contribution, was already seamlessly integrated, its cryocoolant tubes glowing with a faint blue light, a stark contrast to the angry orange glow of the main boilers. "Captain?" Ida shouted over the din, wiping a smear of grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. His uniform was, for the first time Izuku could remember, slightly askew. "The reinforcements are complete. We've diverted power from the secondary weapon systems and life support in the non-essential crew quarters to buttress the primary structural integrity field. It's a risky configuration, but it should increase our ship's resistance to kinetic and electromagnetic stress by a factor of 3. He pointed to a newly welded network of thick, copper conduits that now snaked across the ceiling, all converging on Ochako's personal charging station for her zero-G rig. "Furthermore, I have created a direct, shielded power line from the Ethereum core to this station. When the time comes, it will allow us to channel an unprecedented amount of raw energy directly into First Mate Uraraka's rig. The power surge will be, well, colossal would be an understatement." Ochako looked at the thick cables, a nervous but excited energy bubbling inside her. The thought of channeling that much power through her body, of making an entire warship weightless, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Izuku placed a hand on a vibrating bulkhead, feeling the thrum of the ready and waiting power. "Incredible work, Ida. You and your team are the bedrock of this ship." Ida beamed, his chest puffing out with pride. "We are merely the humble mechanics of your grand design, Captain. We shall not fail you." Ochako then led Izuku further down the corridor to a workshop that was a chaotic explosion of half-finished inventions, blueprints, and spare parts. Sparks flew from a welding torch in the corner, and the air smelled of superheated metal and something faintly like burnt sugar. This was the domain of Mei Hatsum. Mei was the eccentric, brilliant, and slightly unhinged head of research and development for the entire Emerald Marauder network. Her home was on the Roost, their mobile base, but she often hitched a ride on the All Might to field test her newest babies. With her pink hair tied up in a messy bun and a pair of ridiculously oversized welding goggles perched on her head, she looked like a mad scientist in the throes of a breakthrough. "Deku! Ochako! Perfect timing!" she squealed, her voice muffled by her goggles. She flipped the goggles up, revealing eyes that shone with a manic creative energy. "You've come to see my latest masterpiece. A solution to one of your little plan's tiniest, most potentially fatal flaws." Izuku blinked. "Fatal flaw? Of course," Mei said, gesturing wildly. "Your gravity drop plan is brilliant, yes, very dramatic. But what happens after you land? You'll be in the heart of the lion's den. Surrounded. You need a way to create a diversion, to sow chaos, to make a big, loud, messy entrance that isn't just you getting blown up. And I, Mei Hatsum, have the answer." She pulled a tarp off a large object in the center of her workshop. It was a modification for Izuku's steam-powered grappling arm. It was a bulky, cylindrical attachment, intricately designed with pressure gauges, reinforced conduits, and a wide, bell-shaped muzzle. It looked heavy, powerful, and incredibly unstable. "I call her the Delaware Smash," Mei announced with a flourish. "The Delaware Smash?" Izuku asked, cautiously circling the device. "Yup. I notice you favor using your Air Force boots to create small, localized bursts of air for maneuvering. So I thought, why not scale that up? Like a lot?" She tapped the device affectionately. "This baby draws directly from the All Might's main boiler via high-pressure umbilical cord. It accumulates a massive amount of steam in this reinforced compression chamber, then releases it in a single, focused, concussive blast. A fist of pure, pressurized air. It's non-lethal, but it can punch a hole through an unshielded freighter hull from 50 meters away. Or, if you prefer, create a shockwave that can knock out a ship's external sensors and communications arrays in a wide arc. It's your very own personal thunderclap." Izuku stared at the invention, his mind immediately seeing its tactical applications. It was a perfect tool for his philosophy, a weapon of disablement, not destruction. It was a way to create an opening, to disorient an enemy without bloodshed. It was perfect. "May, this is brilliant!" he breathed, his fatigue momentarily forgotten, replaced by the pure joy of a fellow inventor seeing a beautiful, elegant solution to a complex problem. "I know, right?" May cackled. "It has a few quirks. The recoil is, significant. And if you overcharge it, there's a small chance it might blow your arm off. But hey, high risk, high reward. I've integrated it into your existing gauntlet. Just try not to point it at anything you like." She helped him attach the new device. It was heavier than he was used to, the weight unsettling his balance slightly, but as his fingers curled around the trigger mechanism, he could feel the immense, contained power within it. It felt like holding a caged hurricane in his hand. As they left May's workshop, Izuku felt a renewed sense of confidence. It wasn't just his plan anymore. It was Ida's reinforcements, May's invention, Ochako's courage, Eijiro's skill, the dedication of his entire crew. Every single person on this ship was a vital, irreplaceable part of the clockwork mechanism. His job as captain was simply to wind it up and point it in the right direction. He and Ochako walked in comfortable silence for a while, their steps echoing in the metallic corridors. They ended up back on the observation deck, the same place they had started. The storm still raged outside, a silent, cosmic ballet of destruction. "She's a mad genius," Ochako said, breaking the silence as she looked down at the Delaware smash on Izuku's arm. "But a genius nonetheless. She's the best there is," Izuku agreed. He flexed his fingers, the new gauntlet whirring softly. "This could make a real difference." He turned to look at Ochako, truly look at her, not as his first mate, but as his friend. Her flight suit was zipped up, and her own rig was undergoing its final power-up sequence at Ida's station. But here, in the quiet of the dome, she seemed smaller, more vulnerable. "Ochako," he began, his voice softer than it had been all day. "The most dangerous part of this plan rests on you. Channeling that much power, making the entire ship weightless. No one has ever done anything like that before. If you feel for a second that it's too much," she cut him off, not with words, but with a look of such fierce, unwavering resolve that it took his breath away. "When my family's island was failing," she said, her voice a low, intense murmur, "our Ethereum crystal was dying. The ground shook every day. We were one bad tremor away from falling into the miasma. We sent out distress calls, pleaded with the sovereignty for aid. They never came. They wrote us off as a non-essential asset." Her eyes took on a distant, haunted look. "We were saved by a pirate crew. They raided a sovereignty shipment, just like we do, and gave us enough Ethereum to stabilize our home. They didn't ask for payment, they just helped. That's the day I decided what I wanted to do with my life. That's the day I heard the first stories of a brilliant young captain with green hair who was trying to change the skies." She met his gaze, her brown eyes shining in the dim light. "The strain, the danger, it's nothing. It's a price I would pay 1,000 times over to give the people of Ireland the same chance my family got. The chance you give people, Izuku." He was speechless. In all their years together, she had never spoken of her past in such detail. He saw the core of her, the unshakable foundation of her optimism and her fierce loyalty. It wasn't a choice for her, it was who she was. He found his voice, though it was thick with emotion. "I'm glad you found us, Ochako." "Me too, Captain," she whispered. A ship-wide chime echoed through the deck, followed by Ida's voice over the intercom, crisp and formal. "Attention all hands. We are approaching the storm's perimeter. Final preparations in 5 minutes. All personnel to their stations. Captain to the bridge." The calm was over. The moment had arrived. They shared one last look, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between them, of the terrifying task ahead, and of the unspoken promise to see each other through it. Then, they turned and headed for the bridge, their steps perfectly in sync, two friends walking towards the heart of the storm. Izuku stepped onto the bridge, and the atmosphere was electric. Every crew member was at their post, their faces illuminated by the glow of their consoles. The main viewport was no longer a window into serene space, but a wall of roiling, violent energy. The ship was already beginning to shudder from the outer bands of the storm. He walked to the captain's chair at the center of the bridge but didn't sit. He stood beside it, placing a hand on the cool metal of its armrest, grounding himself. "Report," he commanded, his voice cutting cleanly through the rising noise. "All systems are green. Structural integrity field is holding at 100%. Ida said from engineering. "Weapons are powered down as ordered. Ready to divert all power to the integrity field and the zero-G rig on your command." Ijiro reported from the helm, his hands tight on the controls. Izuku looked out at the maelstrom. This was it. The culmination of all their planning, all their preparations. He thought of Melissa Shield's plea, of Bakugo's arrogant challenge, of the sleeping people on the freighter, of the cheering crowds on Atheon. It all led to this moment. They were a tiny spark of defiance about to fly into a fire that should, by all logic, extinguish them. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of charged ozone. "Helm, take us in," he said, his voice ringing with a calm and absolute authority that belied the storm in his own heart. "Let's show them what the wind of freedom really looks like." Ijiro nodded, his knuckles white. He eased the throttle forward, and the All Might tilted its nose down, leaving the relative safety of open space behind. Like a diver plunging into a raging sea, the ship surged forward and was swallowed by the storm. The moment the All Might crossed the storm's perimeter, reality dissolved into a symphony of violence. The gentle hum of the ship's systems was instantly drowned out by a deafening, soul-shaking roar as the ether storm seized them in its grip. The bridge, once a bastion of calm, became a chaotic cage. Red alert lights flashed in a frantic, disorienting rhythm, bathing the crew's tense faces in a hellish crimson glow. The ship bucked and groaned like a living creature in agony. Unsecured tools and loose data slates flew across the deck, smashing against bulkheads. Izuku, his feet planted wide and his hands gripping the back of the captain's chair, felt the raw, untamed power of the storm try to rip the very floor out from under him. It wasn't like navigating a simple atmospheric squall. This was like being trapped inside a collapsing star. "Structural integrity at 92%. We're taking a beating out here, Captain." Ida's voice crackled over the intercom, strained and shot through with static. The sounds of protesting metal and exploding pressure valves echoed behind his words. "Hold her steady, Ijiro," Izuku yelled over the cacophony. "I'm trying." Ijiro Kirishima grunted, his entire body straining as he wrestled with the helm. The ship's controls, normally responsive to the slightest touch, fought him with the stubborn force of a wild beast. "It's like trying to fly a kite in a hurricane." Outside the main viewport, there was nothing but a blinding, swirling vortex of violet and green energy. Colossal bolts of lightning, thick as ancient trees, spiderwebbed across the chaos, their brilliance momentarily whiting out all vision. The ship was a tiny, insignificant speck tossed on the waves of a cosmic ocean. "Sensors are useless," Ochako reported from her station, her knuckles white as she gripped the console. "It's all noise. I can't tell up from down, let alone spot a sovereignty ship, that's the point," Izuku shouted, his eyes darting between the chaotic view outside and the fluctuating power readings on the main display. "They can't see us either. Ida, how are the kinetic plates holding? The port side array is taking heavy particle bombardment. Field integrity is dropping to 85%. Rerouting auxiliary power from the starboard shields to compensate." A particularly violent lurch threw the ship into a steep, terrifying dive. A collective cry went up from the bridge crew. Izuku's stomach leaped into his throat. For a horrifying second, he thought they were going to be torn apart. "Pull up! Pull up!" he roared. Ijiro gave a feral grin, his teeth bared in a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "This is what she was built for." He threw his weight into the controls, the muscles in his arms and back bulging with effort. With a groan of tortured metal that seemed to echo through Izuku's very bones, the All Might responded. The ship shuddered, leveled out, and continued its treacherous path through the storm's heart. This was the first phase of the plan, survival. They were a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the thunder. The Sovereignty's outer destroyer screen would be riding out the storm, their sensors blinded, confident that no one would be insane enough to attempt a passage. Izuku's gamble was that their insanity would be their greatest shield. For what felt like an eternity, they were tossed and battered, the crew working in a state of high alert, adrenaline-fueled focus. They operated not as individuals, but as a single, cohesive organism. Ida was the ship's iron will, constantly shifting power, reinforcing weak points, keeping their vessel from disintegrating. Ijiro was its heart, his unyielding strength at the helm their only guide through the chaos. Ochako was its eyes, desperately trying to filter a single, coherent signal from the blizzard of static. And Izuku was its mind, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the storm, issuing commands, anticipating the next lurch, the next energy wave, his brain processing the chaos into a series of manageable threats. Then, a new sound cut through the storm's roar. A high-pitched, insistent alarm from Ochako's console. "Captain? I've got something!" she yelled, her voice tight with alarm. "A proximity alert! Something big, dead ahead. Is it a cruiser?" Izuku demanded, his blood running cold. Had they been spotted? "I don't think so. The signature is, it's not a ship. It's solid, and massive. A rogue asteroid caught in the storm's gravity well." On the main viewport, the swirling chaos momentarily parted, revealing a horrifying sight. A chunk of rock and ice the size of a small island was tumbling directly towards them. They were on a collision course. "Evasive maneuvers! Hard to starboard!" Izuku commanded. "There's no room!" Ijiro yelled back, his face pale. "The energy currents are too strong! They've got us locked in!" Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to grip the bridge. This was it. An unforeseen variable. The one thing his calculations couldn't predict. They had survived the sovereignty and the storm, only to be smashed to pieces by a random act of celestial physics. Izuku's mind raced, faster than it ever had before. There was no way around it. No way under it. Which meant, "Don't go around it," he said, a wild, desperate idea forming in his mind. "Go through it." His crew stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Captain, that's suicide!" Ochako cried out. "It's a C-type asteroid. Carbonaceous chondrite. It's porous, full of ice and rock, not solid iron." Izuku explained, his voice a torrent of rapid-fire analysis. He was pointing at a massive fissure on the asteroid's surface, a dark crack in its rugged hide. "The internal structure will be weak. May. I need a full power surge to the Delaware smash. Now, you got it, Captain!" May's voice, giddy with excitement, crackled over the comms from her workshop. "Oh, this is going to be so much fun! Ida, divert all forward shield power to the bow. Reinforce the ram plate. Ijiro, I need you to aim for that fissure. Dead center." The crew, their initial shock replaced by a surge of desperate, adrenaline-fueled faith in their captain, moved to obey. On the main screen, Izuku could see the power levels for his gauntlet spike into the red. A heavy, thrumming vibration started in his arm, the device humming with an almost terrifying amount of contained energy. He raced to the forward observation window, bracing himself against the bulkhead. "On my mark, Ijiro!" The asteroid filled the entire viewport, a mountain of tumbling death. The fissure was a tiny target in its vast, scarred face. "Now!" Izuku roared. He raised his arm, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The Delaware smash fired. It wasn't a beam or a projectile. It was a silent, invisible shockwave, a fist of pure kinetic force that erupted from the gauntlet. The air in front of the ship shimmered for a microsecond. The recoil was immense, throwing Izuku back against the wall with a force that knocked the wind out of him. The shockwave hit the asteroid. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the fissure exploded outwards. The porous rock, already weakened, shattered. The asteroid didn't just split, it disintegrated, blowing apart into a cloud of 1,000,000 smaller rocks and a massive plume of ice crystals. "Brace for impact!" Ida screamed. Ijiro didn't flinch. He steered the All Might directly into the newly created cloud of debris. The ship was pelted by a hailstorm of rock and ice, the sound a deafening machine gun rattle against the hull. The reinforced bow plate screamed in protest, but it held. They burst through the other side of the debris cloud, back into the relative calm of the storm. The ship was battered, its hull scarred and dented, but it was intact. They were alive. A stunned silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the panting of the crew and the lingering roar of the storm outside. Aijiro let out a shaky, triumphant laugh. Did we just punch an asteroid to death? Izuku pushed himself off the wall, his arm aching from the recoil. A wide, exhausted grin spread across his face. Looks like it. Status report. The reports came in, one by one. The hull was damaged but holding. The engine was strained but stable. They had weathered the worst of it. They had flown through the heart of the storm and emerged, battered but unbroken, on the other side. As the ship cleared the last of the storm's outer bands, the violent chaos outside began to subside. The deafening roar softened to a distant rumble. The swirling vortex gave way to dark, angry clouds, pierced by the faint, distant glow of islands' defensive shields. Below them, arrayed in a terrifying, perfect circle, was the Sovereignty's inner blockade. They had made it. They were behind enemy lines, but they had been spotted. The moment they emerged from the storm, alarms blared across the Sovereignty fleet. They had appeared on the inner screen's short-range sensors like a ghost materializing from a wall of static. Unidentified vessel emerging from the Serpent's Veil! A frantic voice crackled over the open comms channel. All fighters, scramble! Intercept! Intercept! So much for the silent approach, Ochako said grimly, her eyes fixed on the swarm of red icons that now lit up her sensor screen. Dozens of Sovereignty fighter skiffs, sleek, predatory craft called Talons, were detaching from the cruisers and ascending to meet them. The flagship of the blockade, the heavy cruiser Indomitable, turned its massive broadside towards them. It was commanded by a herald named Kendo Rappa, a brutish man known for his love of overwhelming force. He wasn't interested in questions or warnings. Fire a warning shot across their bow. Rappa's voice boomed across the comms, cold and authoritative. And by warning shot, I mean take out their primary engine. The massive cannons of the Indomitable glowed with a malevolent orange light. They're powering up their main battery, Aijiro warned. It's time for Phase 2. Izuku commanded, his voice sharp and clear, cutting through the renewed tension. Ochako, get to your station. Ida, divert all power to the zero-G rig. All of it. Aijiro, take us up. Straight up. The All Might's engines roared back to life, pushing the ship into a steep, desperate climb, away from the fighters and the cruisers firing. Ochako didn't hesitate. She sprinted from the bridge, heading for the small, reinforced chamber where her rig's charging station was located. The main cannons of the Indomitable fired. 3 massive bolts of superheated plasma tore through the space where the All Might had been moments before. They were too slow. Fighters closing fast. Izuku watched the Talon fighters ascend, their engines leaving fiery trails in the sky. They were faster, more agile. They would be on them in seconds. Ochako, are you ready? Izuku yelled into his personal comm. Her voice came back strained. He could hear the hum of immense power in the background. I'm in position. The rig is, wow, it's glowing. I've never seen it this bright before. The power readings are off the charts, Captain. On my mark, engage the rig and hold on, Izuku said. He turned to Ida. Kill the engines. Now, cutting main power. Deep within the ship, the thrumming heart of the All Might went silent. The emergency lights flickered on, casting the bridge in a dim, eerie glow. The ship, its upward momentum spent, hung in the air for a single, terrifying moment, a helpless target against the dark clouds. Now, Ochako! Now! In her chamber, Ochako Uraraka took a deep, steadying breath and slammed her palm down on the activation panel. Power, raw and untamed, surged from the ship's Ethereum core, through the reinforced conduits, and directly into her rig. The world dissolved into a blinding flash of pink light. She screamed, not in pain, but in sheer effort as an unimaginable force flowed through her. It was like trying to hold a star in her hands. Her own innate ability, the power to nullify gravity, was amplified 1,000-fold. It radiated out from her, an invisible wave that washed over every deck, every bulkhead, every rivet of the All Might. On the bridge, the crew felt a sudden, bizarre lurch, a feeling of impossible lightness. A loose bolt on the floor floated up, hovering in the air. The All Might, a vessel weighing thousands of tons, was now weightless. It began to fall. Not with the screaming descent of a crippled ship, but with the silent, graceful fall of a feather. The Talon fighters, ascending at full throttle, overshot them completely, their pilots staring in stunned disbelief as the massive airship simply dropped out of the sky above them. "Report from Talon leader!" A confused pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "The target, it's not crashing. It's falling. No engine signature, no heat trail. It's gone completely dead." On the bridge of the Indomitable, Harold Rappa stared at his sensor screen in fury. "What do you mean, falling? Ships don't just fall. Blasted out of the sky." But they couldn't get a target lock. With no heat or energy signature to guide their targeting systems, the ship was a ghost. They were firing blind. Plasma bolts tore through the empty air as the All Might continued its silent, inexorable descent, falling right through the heart of the Sovereignty fleet. Inside the ship, it was an eerie, surreal experience. The silence was absolute, broken only by the creaking of the hull and the ragged breathing of the crew. They were in freefall, held in place only by their magnetic boots and safety harnesses. Izuku watched the Sovereignty cruisers glide past the viewport, so close he could see the individual crew members on their decks staring up at them in utter confusion. His plan, his insane, impossible plan, was working. The descent felt like it took a lifetime. Izuku's eyes were glued to the altimeter. They were falling faster and faster, hurtling towards the gleaming, technological marvel that was island below. "Ochako, how are you holding up?" he asked into his comm, his voice a tense whisper. Her reply was a pained, shaky gasp. "I can't hold it much longer, Captain. The strain is too much. Just a little longer. We're almost there." They dropped below the last of the frigates. They were through the blockade. But now they had a new problem, the ground. Or, in this case, the surface of a floating island, approaching at a terminal velocity. 5,000 meters! The ship's computer announced in its calm, monotone voice. 4,000 meters! Ida, get ready to reignite the engines! Izuku ordered. Ijiro, prepare to level us out. Ochako, release the ship on my mark. 3,000 meters, stand by. Izuku said, his heart hammering in his chest. This was the most dangerous part. If their timing was off by a single second, they would become a crater in the middle of island. 2,000 meters, mark! Ochako screamed, a final, desperate exertion of will, and then released her power. The effect was instantaneous. Gravity, sudden and brutal, reasserted its dominance. The full weight of the All Might slammed back into existence. The ship plummeted, no longer a feather but a falling anvil. The crew were thrown against their harnesses with bone-jarring force. "Ignite!" Izuku roared. "Engines firing!" Ida yelled. With a sound like the birth of a sun, the All Might's engines roared back to life. The ship shuddered violently as its powerful thrusters fought against their deadly momentum. Ijiro pulled back on the helm with all his might, his face a mask of concentration. The ship's descent slowed, but not enough. The ground was rushing up to meet them. Landing pads, buildings, the gleaming central tower of island, all were growing in the viewport at an alarming speed. "It's not enough! We're coming in too hot!" Ijiro yelled, panic finally seeping into his voice. Izuku didn't hesitate. He raced to the helm, standing beside his pilot. He raised the Delaware Smash, now recharged from the engine's restart, and aimed it down, out of the forward viewport. "Give me a full power reverse thrust!" he commanded. And as Ijiro complied, Izuku fired the gauntlet. A massive shockwave of compressed air blasted downwards from the ship, hitting the landing platform below. The resulting backblast was like a giant, invisible hand catching them. The ship lurched upwards, its descent finally arrested just a few hundred feet from the ground. The All Might, steaming and scarred, its hull groaning in protest, finally settled onto the main landing platform of the island. The landing was rough, more of a controlled crash, but they were down. They were safe. For a moment, the bridge crew could only sit there, panting, their bodies trembling with post-adrenaline fatigue. They had done it. They had broken the unbreakable blockade, but their respite was short-lived. A new alarm began to blare. "Captain," the tactical officer reported, her voice shaky. "The Sovereignty fighters, they're descending. They're coming for us." Above them, The sky was already filling with the angry hornet-like shapes of the Talon fighters, swooping down for the kill. They were a landed duck, a sitting target. Izuku stood tall, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. He looked at his crew, a fierce pride welling in his chest. They wanted a fight, he said, his voice ringing with a new, hard-edged determination. Let's give them one. He keyed the ship-wide comms. All hands, battle stations. They may have us cornered, but they've forgotten one thing. He looked out at the approaching fighters, a defiant grin touching his lips. We're the Emerald Marauders. And this is where we make our stand.